What's up, football heads? Welcome back to that show. As always, I'm your host, Kyle McQueen. We got a special bonus episode today. I've been teasing all week. We're going to do the first ever, possibly last ever, Powerless rankings.
I'm too weak. Don't kill me.
And what brings this on, there's been some buzz recently, and it's caught my attention. It may have caught yours. We have I never understood that. When you write it, you write N historic. It doesn't make sense. A historic amount of teams here at the midway point tied for or vying for the worst record in the league. You got, what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams tied at 2-7. 2 more at 2-6. And then we got a couple more in here. The Jets are 3-6. The Cowboys are 3-5. Just lost Dak. They're plummeting. But I'm going to take a look at these teams, take a look at their schedule, and I'm not actually going to rank them out, but see who actually has a viable chance to get the number 1 overall pick in a draft where a lot of the draft nicks are saying, it's not the strongest draft. There's not this plethora of quarterbacks at the top. I mean, I still expect, going into last season, it was Caleb Williams and Drake May were the first round quarterbacks. Then Jaden Daniels obviously has a monster season, wins the Heisman, puts himself in there, and through the even after the season into the beginning of the draft process, J.J. McCarthy wasn't considered a first round pick. Bo Nix certainly not considered a first round pick. Michael Penix, a lot of people on the fence about him being a first round pick, and then all those guys go in the first 12 picks. So you think about the Kenny Pickett year, he goes in the first round. When you have a bunch of needy teams, they can talk themselves into drafting the quarterbacks higher than maybe they would stack out against other prospects, because quarterback's the most important position in sports, so it's understandable. But there's a good handful of quarterbacks out there this year: Carson Beck, Shedeur Sanders, other guys that I'm probably not as familiar with yet because I watch college football very marginally, so I'm not going to act like I'm an expert or anywhere close to that on these kids right now. But that's just the vibe that's out there from the people that I trust and watch their shit and listen to their stuff, talking about the drafts and the upcoming drafts and whatnot. But I want to go team by team, look at the schedule, and see who viably might end up, who could get the top pick in this draft. The teams right now, we're looking at the 2-7 teams: Carolina Panthers, Cleveland Browns, Jacksonville Jaguars, Las Vegas Raiders, the Patriots, who I believe by tiebreakers currently have the first overall pick, the Saints and the Giants. Then you got 2-6 teams: the Dolphins and the Titans, the Jets at 3-6, and the Cowboys at 3-5. And then you get into the Bengals are 4-6. I don't think anyone thinks the Bengals are going to get the top pick. Colts at 4-5, Seahawks 4-5. The 4-win teams, I'm not going to pay any attention to them, because I think at least one of these teams is going to bottom out with 3 wins max. But we'll start with the Panthers. They had I guess technically they had the first overall pick last year that they had traded to the Bears the previous offseason, but they were the worst team in the league last year. So let's look at the Panthers schedule. And honestly, some of these teams off rip, before I even get into the Panthers, some of these teams off rip, like I said, the Jets, I feel like, I don't know that they're rebounding now, and it's going to, Aaron Rodgers is trying to manifest one of those old Green Bay teams that started bad. It happened once or twice. They started bad, made a run, made the playoffs, did some things, and he kind of clings to that hope anytime he's on a bad team. And it's hey, there were some Packers teams and blah, blah, blah. I don't know that they're going to rebound to that extent and make the playoffs or even make a run at the playoffs, but there's so much talent on the team. You saw them kind of gel and put some things together last week against the Texans on Thursday night. And it might be a back and forth season, but they're going to get at least one more win. And like I said, 4 wins I think is going to take you out of contention for the top pick. They're probably going to get at least a couple more. So I'm going to write the Jets off. I was going to write the Cowboys off, but the Dak injury, and then I looked at the schedule, so I'm going to keep them on there. We'll talk about them. I'm also probably going to write off the Browns and the Jags. I think the Browns have way too much talent. And as everyone knows, we talked about with Jameis Winston, like you're going to get good Jameis, you're going to get bad Jameis, and then you're going to get games where you get good Jameis and bad Jameis. But they still got a ton of pieces on the defense. Nick Chubb at some point here is going to mix back in and get into form. There's too much talent on the team for them not to steal a couple games here the rest of the season. Then the Jags, Trevor Lawrence, it's trending toward him not playing. We'll see how long he's out. That's obviously a factor. But they're another team that, they were, 8-3 last year, I think, before they collapsed. And, they lose Calvin Ridley, but there's still a good amount of talent on the team. There's still good talent on the defense. Doug Peterson, at the very least, has won a Super Bowl as a coach. And as long as Trevor Lawrence isn't out for the long haul, again, we'll look at the schedule. I'm going to keep them in the mix to look at the schedule. But I don't think the Jags are going to end up as the worst team in the league. But let's dive into the Panthers. The Germany game, huge implications. I think there's 2 of these 2-7 teams, or 4 of the 2-7 teams play each other, 2 matchups. And this is one of them, the Panthers in Munich against the Giants. And we'll get to the Giants later, but I think the Giants are probably going to win this game. Daniel Jones, obviously a train wreck. But I like what Tyrone Tracy's doing in the run game. Obviously, Malik Neighbors is a stud. Having that stud allows some of the other guys that they have in the receiving room to kind of fill what their role should be easier because you have that number one guy, as opposed to the past when you had a Wan'Dale Robinson's probably playing a bigger role and being asked to do more than he probably should be because they don't have that ace receiver, but now they do. So they have some talent on the offensive side of the football. It's just Daniel Jones is not good. But defensively, I've talked about it at length. I put out my piece about how Dexter Lawrence is the best player in football right now. And then immediately Trey Hendrickson has 4 sacks and overtakes him for the sack lead. But at the very least, Dexter Lawrence now has a Campbell's Chunky Soup commercial. So shouts out to Dexter Lawrence and Campbell's Chunky Soup. And I will take 0.00001% of the credit for him getting that commercial, for being brave enough in this space of hot takes to not make a hot take, but an informed take as to why Dexter Lawrence at least was, when I said it, the best player in football. But the defensive front, Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, it's monstrous. It's the best unit on the team, and it's one of the best units in football. So you're going up against a Panthers team that has woeful pass protection. So I just feel like those guys are going to get after Bryce Young all day. Bryce Young, I do think, still has some potential. I think he was put in a very bad situation. He is probably going to need to be a reclamation project with some other team elsewhere after this season, after next season, whatever. But Bryce Young is at his worst when the offensive line is getting abused and the pass rushers are getting home all day, and you put their offensive line, their pass protection up against Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns. Recipe for disaster. So I feel like Daniel Jones, for as not good as he's been, and as much as I sit up here and say he's trash, he's a train wreck, he's awful at football, he's been not catastrophically bad. He's just been incredibly not good. And as long as you're not catastrophically bad against the Panthers, the Panthers picked up a win last week against the Saints, who have maybe the worst vibes in football. We'll get to the Saints in a minute, but as long as Daniel Jones can just not turn the ball over 3 or 4 times, which he hasn't been, and they, lean on Tyrone Tracy, lean on the run game a little bit, just scheme some shit to try and get the ball in Malik Neighbors' hands. I think they can score enough points, even if it's all field goals. That defensive line is going to be after Bryce Young's ass, and it's going to be a disastrous day for the Panthers on offense. So I think that this is a huge swing game because then the Panthers, they got Chiefs, Bucks, maybe Mike Evans is back by then, by December 1st, because they got a bye in here after this week before the Chiefs game. So you're looking at 3 weeks from now, maybe Mike Evans is back. At Philly, then later on they host the Cardinals, who are surging. They're playing pretty well right now. Then you got the Bucks again late in the season. Mike Evans certainly should be back by then if he doesn't get re-injured again. We don't want to wish that on anybody, especially my boy Mikey Shipwreck. Fucking just an absolute. Mike Evans is the Frank Gore of receivers. Write that down. Put that somewhere. Publish it. I feel like he's that guy that it never feels spectacular. It never feels like he's making these highlight reel catches. He's having these 2,000-yard seasons or whatever, but just consistently every year, no matter what, you're gonna get 1,000 yards. You're gonna get a ton of catches. You're gonna get a bunch of touchdowns, and then they finish off at Atlanta. So you got that Cowboys game in Carolina. But other than that, I don't see where they're winning a game here. Maybe this first Bucks game in Carolina, if Mike Evans isn't back in a few weeks, they might be able to take that. But are they going to beat the Chiefs even off of a bye? No. Are they going to beat the Eagles in Philly? No. Maybe, depending on what happens with the Cardinals and the flow of their season, maybe you could beat the Cardinals in Carolina in late December, but I wouldn't be confident about it. And then at Tampa, at Atlanta, and maybe Atlanta's locked up the division. Maybe they've locked up their seeding and they rest their starters and you can steal one. But I'm not projecting out that far with something like that. So if they don't beat the Giants in Germany, you're looking at the Cowboys game. If Dak is still out, because if Dak comes back, the Cowboys, for as much of a train wreck season as they're having, they are a vastly more talented team than the Carolina Panthers. So if Dak is back, I saw today that he's leaning toward having season-ending surgery and he's going to get a second opinion, so we'll see how that goes. But if he's back, I think the Cowboys win that game. If he's not back, we've seen Cooper Rush win a bunch of games before. I've watched him beat my Vikings. So it's not like you're putting Sean Mannion out there or TJ Yates or some just absolute garbage quarterback. So even then, even with Cooper Rush, they could beat the Panthers. But that's going to be a critical game. But do I see the Panthers winning both those games? Doubtful. So I think the Panthers are looking at a 2 to 4 win season, probably 2 or 3, maybe 3. We'll see. But the Panthers certainly in the mix for that top pick. The Browns, like I said, with Jameis, there's too much talent on the defense. If Nick Chubb works in, Jameis, you're going to get good Jameis, bad Jameis. Jameis, where you get both good and bad in the same game. But they're the other team, or one of the other two teams this weekend, them versus the Saints, 2-7 teams. So that's going to be a big time showdown in terms of the Powerless rankings. Like I said, the Saints, maybe the worst vibes in the league right now. Just a train wreck, 7 losses in a row after the incredibly hot start where they were just hanging big time points on everybody. But they fire their coach. You got former players calling out the quarterback, talking all kinds of shit. You got your best offensive weapon out with yet another concussion. You don't know when he's going to be back. Derek Carr's confidence is pretty low. If he's coming back and he's saying, listen, I'm not a savior, I'm not asking him to come out and say that he is a savior. And I'm not saying that every time someone comes back or comes in and says, hey, I'm not a savior, that it's bad vibes. But in this situation, it just feels like Derek Carr's confidence pretty low. There's a graphic floating around of through 4 seasons, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seasons, who has lost the most games as a starting quarterback in like the first like 4, 5, 6 seasons? David Carr. Everyone after that, up until whatever season Derek Carr is in now, which I think is his 11th season, Derek Carr. Most losses. So, I mean, most losses in the league as a quarterback through 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 seasons, or not 7, 8, 9, 10 seasons. That's what you need here. You need to rack up losses to get the number 1 pick. So, I think the Saints could be in the mix. Browns got throttled. I think they can bounce back. It's in New Orleans. You would look at what happened with the Saints. Cam Jordan trying to walk out of the building, still in his pads and cleats. Like, I just can't even go in the locker room. We put out the text about, apologizing to Saints fans. Like, we just lost to the Panthers. What the hell? And now you got the same record as the Panthers now. So, I don't know. It's a situation where if the vibes weren't terrible, the Saints at home could be set up for a bounce back. But the vibes are so bad. And I think the Browns, Jameis, I think he's going to rally the troops like he always does. And I think the Browns probably win this game. And that's going to give them 3 wins. Then they host the Steelers on Thursday Night Football. Excuse me, Browns-Saints is next weekend. I'm looking at the schedule. I'm not even looking at the date. I guess the Browns are on a bye this week. So that would be next weekend. Then Thursday Night Football the following against the Steelers in Cleveland, at Broncos, at Steelers, host the Chiefs, at Bengals, host the Dolphins, at Baltimore. So maybe the Dolphins game, they could steal that because the Dolphins aren't very good. Even though they got their pieces back, they're still not winning games, or they get Tua back, I should say. And it's in Cleveland. And maybe one of these Steelers games. The Steelers are playing really good football. They got a really good defense. Russ has been playing lights out since he came back. But I don't know. It's one of those deals where it's the AFC North. It's a divisional game. Anything can happen. Maybe that Thursday night, maybe coming off a win against the Saints, maybe the Browns get in there and steal that. But I think we got to see how the Broncos go. That could be another game that the Browns might be able to steal depending on where the Broncos trend through the end of November. But right now, the Browns are not playing like they're a better team than the Broncos, and it's in Denver. So that kind of is what it is. Not going to beat the Chiefs, not going to beat the Bengals, not going to beat the Ravens, I don't think. So, I don't know, maybe the Browns still are in contention, but I think they're going to beat the Saints next weekend, not this weekend, next weekend. And then it might come down to that Dolphins game. So the Browns might be in the mix here. But again, that Browns-Saints showdown is going to help put one of these teams in the driver's seat. The Jags, like I said, I'm writing off because I just think they got enough talent. And I don't think Trevor Lawrence is going to be out for the season. But even if he misses the next few games, they do have a tough schedule coming up. They got the Vikings this weekend. Then they're at Detroit next weekend. Then they get a bye. Then they host the Texans. But then you get a stretch of winnable games here to end the season. They're at Tennessee. That's a very winnable game. The Titans are 2-6. They're going back to Will Levis. They have not looked good all year, despite my best hopes and my futures bets. Then they host the Jets. I think that the Jets are a more talented team. The Jets by this point could be gelling and clicking more, or it could be a back and forth thing, and this might be a back and not a fourth game for the Jets, and the Jags might be able to take that at home in Jacksonville. Then they go to Vegas to take on the Raiders. Then they host the Titans, and then they finish the season at Indianapolis at the Colts. So I think you got these 2 Titans games. You got the Raiders game. You got the Colts game. You got this Jets game in Jacksonville. Like they're going to win 2 of those games, and they're going to win 4 games. And like I said, 4 wins, I don't think you're going to get the top pick. I just don't, because the Panthers, I just don't see getting to 4 wins. I could be proven wrong, but I think 3 wins max is going to get you that top pick. So I'm taking the Jags out of the mix. Too many winnable games, 2 Titans games, Raiders, Colts, and then you host the Jets. Even if they lose their next 3 against the Vikings, Lions, and Texans, still, there's too much talent. Maybe they fired Doug Peterson by then, but if not, like Doug Peterson is at least a competent coach. Trevor Lawrence, a competent quarterback. They have protection issues, but I think they're getting at least 2 of these games. I think they're more talented than the Raiders. Titans debatable, but I think they're more talented in the quarterback position, which is going to be key because the Titans just, for whatever talent they have, they just have not been able to put it together at all. But I'm taking the Jags out of the mix. Then you got the Raiders, who have quietly or not quietly looked pretty awful this year. And this is another matchup for next weekend. Raiders at Dolphins. I like the Dolphins there, to be honest. They got weapons. The Raiders defense not playing very well. They traded Devontae Adams. They're shuffling quarterbacks. They're really not settled, you feel like, anywhere other than like Max Crosby. So I think them going to Miami, I will avoid singing the Will Smith song because the cadence. Ignore me. I'm a fucking fool. But I think going to Miami's going to take this one. And then they host the Raiders. Then they play at the Chiefs, at the Bucks, host the Falcons on Monday Night Football, which let's all pray to God that gets flexed. Then they host the Jags in that Jags-Raiders game I was talking about. Then they play the Saints in New Orleans in the penultimate week of the season, finally ending the season hosting the Chargers. So I think they're losing to the Dolphins. If they lose to the Dolphins, I think they're going to lose to the Broncos. Now, that is a divisional game. So let's see. They played earlier in the year, and the Broncos beat them at home. So if you're like me and you lean into divisional games and anybody can win any given Sunday, I always lean into the split for divisional teams, but the Raiders are so bad that I mean the Broncos can beat the Raiders. Let's be real. In Vegas. So again, the Broncos were kind of on the upswing. They had a big letdown. I want to see how they do this weekend, and we'll see. Maybe if they look bad this weekend, they look bad the week after that, possibly. Because the Broncos played at Arrowhead this week. So even if they stay competitive, I'm not worried about it. And then they host the Falcons. So they got a couple tough games here in a row before that Raiders game. So they might be in a we need to bounce back situation. Maybe they play the Chiefs tough, they play the Falcons tough, and they lose them both, and they need this win to stay in the mix. So they might be desperate from hey, we can make the playoffs. We're hanging tough with some of these really good teams. So I think the Broncos are going to beat the Raiders. Then the Raiders, they're not going to... I know every once in a while the Raiders pull this huge upset of the Chiefs. The Chiefs probably got to lose sometime. Maybe it happens November 29th. I am not betting on it. Unless the odds are so astronomical that it's worth throwing a little $5 bet on, just in case. Just in case. But I wouldn't count on it. I wouldn't bet my life on it. So I think the Chiefs beat the Raiders. I think the Bucks beat the Raiders. I think Mike Evans will be back by December 8th. And even without Evans and Godwin, Baker's been holding it down. The defense is doing enough, it seems. I talked to a Bucks fan today, and he said the defense needs to get it together. And I was thinking, oh, shit. I'm here thinking the Bucks defense ain't that bad. But at home, certainly good enough to beat the Raiders. Then the Falcons, not going to happen. I already told you, I think the Jags are going to beat the Raiders. Chargers, last game of the season, probably going to be in a wild card mix situation. I think they're going to beat the Raiders. The Raiders are going to be long gone by that point. Maybe Antonio Pierce gets them up to play spoiler against a divisional opponent who, if they win, they're in. If they lose, maybe they're out. So that could be a situation. But that Raiders at Saints game is going to be another key matchup. Because if the Raiders could feasibly lose out, and if they lose out, losing to the Dolphins and the Saints, that's going to take the Dolphins and the Saints out of the mix to top them for the worst pick. So the Raiders lose out, that's a possibility. If they beat the Saints, we'll get to the Saints schedule, but that could be a big determining factor in the second and last week of the season as to, like, it could come down to that game late in the season of who's going to take themselves out of the conversation and who's going to kind of put themselves in the driver's seat for that top pick. So the Raiders definitely still in the mix. The Patriots, who, like I said, I believe due to tiebreakers are currently technically the number one overall pick. That probably will shift by just how things take shape through the season. I don't know. But the Pats got a tough schedule here, man. 2-7. I feel like they've looked less listless than some of these other teams. Like the Patriots haven't looked as dumpster fiery as the Panthers. The vibes aren't nearly as bad as the Saints. They haven't looked as bad as the Raiders. But they go to Chicago, which is a winnable game, the way Chicago is playing. But Chicago's coming off a bad loss and a tough loss. And they're kind of at the swing point of the season where it's like, we were 4-2, now we're 4-4. You know, yeah, this could go either way. Is Eberflus losing the locker room? Are we handling Caleb the right way? DJ Moore, is he happy? Is he not happy? Is he just frustrated? What's the situation? But it's at Chicago. You get a bad team that has not won a bunch of games. This is a big swing game for Chicago. I think Chicago's going to get it done. Then the Pats, they host the Rams. That's a tough game. The Rams, they got their weapons back. They're starting to surge back upward again toward more of what people were expecting as a playoff team. Some people were considering them a contender. Then at Miami, which in the Belichick era was a house of horrors. We'll see for this current era. But again, there's more talent on the Dolphins. They got enough weapons. Tua's back. He's been back for a couple weeks now. I think they're going to win this weekend. And I just feel like the Patriots, maybe not. But it's a winnable game. But I would still lean Dolphins, it being in Miami. And they played earlier in the year. And the Dolphins beat the Pats in New England. So maybe this is a situation where it's a bad team and a not good team, and they steal a game in each other's place in the division. I would not. I'd be much less shocked if the Pats beat the Dolphins in Miami than the Raiders beating the Chiefs in Arrowhead, obviously. Then they host the Colts, which could be a winnable game. But then you got at Arizona, at Buffalo, host the Chargers, and host the Bills to end the season. So I think those are all losses. Maybe you steal the Cardinals game. Maybe the Bills got whatever seed they're in locked up and they rest their guys. We'll see. But even then, like, who knows? So I don't think they're going to win this Bears game because of where the Bears are at. Now, if the Bears are truly about to go off the rails to the point where, like, Eberflus is going to get fired and everything's going to get shaken up and their season's going to go off the rails, the Pats beating them in Chicago would do that. And that is a distinct possibility. But I would lean much more heavily to the Bears because the Bears are just more talented. They got a top-tier, elite-tier defense with championship caliber potential. You got a ton of weapons on offense. You got, at the very least, intriguing young quarterback. They have protection problems, but the Pats are not loaded with pass rushing options. And so I think their best chances here are the Dolphins game in Miami and avenge their loss at home to Miami from earlier in the year and hosting the Colts. But, like, the Colts are not a bad team. They're not a good team, but they're not a bad team. The Patriots are a bad team. So I think trying to read the tea leaves, I think the Patriots, they're probably going to win one of those games. So I think the Pats are going to get at least 3 wins. And I do think they've flipped the switch of frisky and not frisky a handful of times. That leads me to believe that like they're gonna get one of those two, the Colts or the Dolphins, and then you got that Bears game, you got that Cardinals game. And despite Jim Harbaugh being Jim Harbaugh, I'm still torn on whether or not in the first season, Jim Harbaugh being Jim Harbaugh can outweigh Chargers gonna Charger. Because the Chargers are always gonna Charger. So yeah, something wonky could happen there. I wouldn't predict it. I probably wouldn't bet on it. Mood dependent, but you never know. But I want to see how frisky the Patriots want to be the rest of the season. And Drake May, can he find some sort of flow? So the Patriots, I definitely think are going to win another one of these games, and they're going to have 3 wins. And I think there's a solid chance they're going to win 4 games. I'm going to leave them in here for now, but the more I talk, the more I think the Pats are going to win 4 games, which I think is going to take them out of the mix for the top pick. Then we get the Saints, who have come up a couple times in the schedule prior to this, the various schedules prior to this, but they got a string of home games coming up, and a bye between the second and third of the home games, but they host the Falcons, host the Browns, host the Rams. Then they go to the Giants for the Giants game that I talked about. Did I talk about that? No, I guess I didn't yet. Then they host the Commanders at Green Bay, host the Raiders. We talked about that game, and to the Bucs. So they're going to lose to the Falcons. I got them losing to the Browns. I think they're going to lose to the Rams. They're going to lose to the Commanders. They're going to lose to the Packers. They're going to lose to the Bucs. So you got that Raiders game, which I said massive key. The Giants game, gonna be key. It really comes down to, can you reverse the vibes in some capacity? Like whoever their interim coach is, can he figure something out? Even if it's only for a couple games, you get that like little shot of juice when you get the new interim coach in. It's like, fuck it, we got to play for each other. You know, all the stupid cliches. We're just gonna roll the balls out and have fun this week. So maybe that's enough to flip the juju. Maybe you get a game. Maybe it's the Browns game. But if they lose to the Falcons this week, which I think they will, and they lose to the Browns the following week, which I think they will, and then they have a bye, and then they play the Rams and lose that game, which I think they will. By that point, I don't think there's any juju flipping happening. Like, if you beat the Falcons this week under the interim coach, or you beat the Browns next week, then I think they have a chance to win a couple games. If you beat the Browns next week, I think you can beat the Giants. I think you can beat the Raiders. But if you lose these next 3 games before that Giants game, I think you're going to the Meadowlands and you're going to lose that game. And I think they're going to keep losing until they get to that Raiders game in New Orleans. And then I think the Raiders, there's a lot of Shedeur Sanders trying to speak him to Vegas into existence, which makes a ton of sense. Tom Brady, minority owner. Tom Brady is Shedeur's mentor. Vegas is fairly close to Colorado, where his dad's at, where the family's at. Feels like a good fit for Shedeur and his personality, the Raiders being the Raiders, and having his mentor there. So that feels like a good fit. So it makes sense that he wants to manifest that. But again, Tom Brady is his mentor. I'm not saying they're actively tanking, but there could be people in the organization quietly hoping that they lose the rest of their games so they can get their choice and get Shedeur Sanders. But I don't know. I think that Raiders-Saints game, the way I'm looking at the schedule now, that might be critical. I think the Panthers are going to be there in the mix. But if the Saints lose out until that Raiders game, like I said, I think the Panthers, they got a chance to get one of these games. They got a chance to get the Cowboys game. They got a chance to the Giants this week. But if they don't beat the Giants and they don't beat the Cowboys and Cooper Rush, the rest of these are L's. So they might be sitting at 2-7. So that Saints-Raiders game might be the war to decide who's the other 2-7 team. And then we got to get into the tiebreakers and all that. But the Saints, certainly in the mix, could very easily see, again, they lose these next 3 games, the season just goes off the rails. Just completely off the rails. If they rally and they beat the Falcons, or even if they don't get throttled against the Falcons and they're able to rally and beat the Browns, I think they put themselves in position to win either that Giants game or certainly the Raiders game at home, win 4 games and kind of take themselves out of contention. But I think the odds are greater that they're only going to win one of those 3 in my mind. Like, despite the potential they showed in the first 2 weeks, like the vibes are just so catastrophically bad. Derek Carr, his confidence is through the fucking floor. I just don't see it. But the Giants, we talked about them a lot because they got a lot of matchups against these other teams. The Giants probably the most consequential of these teams. It feels like they have the most matchups against these other 2-7 teams. Maybe I'm wrong, but it felt like it, at least going through the schedule. And now I'm looking at it, and they only have 2. So that was a lie. But like I said, I think they beat the Giants, or I think they beat the Panthers this weekend because of the pass rush. Then they host the Bucs. I think even without Mike Evans, granted this is in 2 weeks because they have a bye after the Germany game. I think even if they don't have Mike Evans back, the Bucs, Baker's just been playing too good. They almost beat the Chiefs. Now, it could be a situation where it's like, fuck, man, like we played the top team in the league that hard and still lost. And then you kind of just get down on it. And maybe you see that layoff after like a heartbreaking loss, or even like a gut-wrenching win where it's just like such an emotional drain that you just don't play your best ball the next week. But again, this is a couple weeks down the road. So, I guess for the Bucs, 3 weeks after that Monday night game against the Chiefs, I think they got enough to beat the Giants. Then the Giants at the Cowboys. We'll see where the Cowboys are at. That's going to be that is a very consequential game because the Cowboys, more talented than the Giants, but the vibes are worse. Like the vibes with the Giants aren't great, but the vibes with the Cowboys are just like disgusting, not good. Like if the Saints didn't exist, the Cowboys vibes might be the worst in the league. So I think the Giants might be able to steal that. They already played earlier in the year, and the Cowboys won in the Meadowlands. So again, going back to the divisional stuff, this could be a situation where the Giants, they want to get back. They beat us in our house. So we're going to beat them in their house. Then they got the Saints. Again, I like the Giants in that game. Then they host the Ravens. They go to the Falcons. They host the Colts, who are one of those middling teams that you could see losing to a bad team, and you can also see upsetting a better team. And then they finish at Philadelphia. So I think they're going to beat the Panthers. And then I think between this Cowboys game and this Saints game, and even that Colts game, I think the Giants are probably going to get to at least 4 wins. Wouldn't shock me if they got to 5 wins. I'd be more surprised, I think, if the Giants, maybe an even amount of surprise, between 3 or 5 wins. But I certainly think the Giants, that defensive front is just such a good unit. They can get you games because it's such an important unit when you go up against a bad team that has a bad offensive line and a young quarterback, or a quarterback that's injured or is seeing ghosts, or whatever the case may be. Shouts out Sam Darnold, but he ain't seeing ghosts anymore. So yeah, I think I'm going to take the Giants. I would not be like mortally shocked if they got the number 1 pick. And if they lose to the Panthers this week, then like that completely shifts the calculus, because then the Panthers are in a position where now they're kind of taking themselves out. And it's like the Giants can lose to anybody. And they got tough games on the schedule. And then it's like, well, could they lose to the Saints? Yeah. They lose to the Cowboys? They already have. Could they lose to the Colts? Certainly. And then the rest of these teams are just flat out better than they are. So if the Giants lose this weekend, they're definitely in the mix. But I don't think they're going to lose this weekend. And so I think they're going to win at least 4 games. And I'm going to take them out of the mix. And we got the Titans, my Titans. Oh, I have so many futures bets on the Titans for win totals, and they are staring disaster in the face. The Titans are 2-6 right now, so they're a half game back of that top spot, that top draft pick. But they got at the Chargers, then they host the Vikings, then they're at the Texans, then they're at the Commanders. Then you got that Jags game we talked about when I was talking about the Jags schedules. Then they host the Bengals, at the Colts, at the Jags, and then they host the Texans. As it is right now, there's no way with any sense of confidence you could pick them to beat the Chargers in LA. No sense of confidence you could pick them to beat the Vikings, even in Tennessee. No sense of confidence you could pick them on the road against the Texans, on the road against the Commanders. Even the Bengals at 4-6, the Bengals are better than the Titans, for sure. Even in Tennessee, I would not feel comfortable picking the Titans over the Bengals, even in Tennessee. And then the Texans again at home. So it's those two Jags games at the worst. The Titans ain't sweeping the Jags unless Trevor Lawrence, for whatever reason, is out for the season. And then one of the defensive linemen goes down. Peterson gets fired and the Jags turn into just a complete wreck of a season. But even then, I expected more out of the Titans, but I haven't seen enough to say they're going to sweep the Jags. So even if you give that a split, who else are they beating? Are they going to beat the Texans? I know the Texans are having their own issues. They got protection issues up front for C.J. Stroud. They got injuries in the wide receiver room. So maybe that November 24th game at Houston, if the receiver, Diggs is out for the season, if Nico Collins is still out, maybe you got the war daddies up front for Tennessee, my boy T'Vondre Sweat, Jeffrey Simmons. Maybe they could just get after C.J. Stroud and steal it. I think that's a legitimate possibility. But I think by the end of the season, Nico Collins is back. Even with the protection issues, I think the Texans will handle business. So, and then you got that Colts game. So they already played the Colts once. Let's see what happened there. Colts beat them by a field goal in mid-October. So there's a case to be made the Titans are going to win 5 games. That they're going to split with the Texans because they're going to somehow be able to get after C.J. Stroud, and Nico Collins isn't back yet, and they steal one in Houston, and they get one of the Jags games, and they get that Colts game. So I could see the Titans winning 5 games. I have too much faith. Maybe it's me being just clinging to my futures bets that there's no real path to getting any of those to hit. But I had so much belief, even though I'm not a Will Levis guy at all. I believed in the roster. I believed in the talent, and I felt like they had a chance to do something. I didn't think the Texans were going to be as good. Everyone thought the Texans were going to be a 12-13 win team. C.J. Stroud was going to be an MVP candidate. They were going to be a Super Bowl favorite. I thought there was going to be a slight step back this year, even with the addition of Diggs, and we've seen that, especially with the protection issues and the injury problems. I thought the Titans had a chance, but I just think they got a chance here in this Texans game. They got a chance in both these Jags games and the Colts game. I think the Titans get the 4 wins. I think they get the 4 wins, and that's going to take them out of the mix, so I'm taking them out. Now we got the Cowboys. Last but not least. Possibly least. That's why we're doing the exercise. But the Cowboys, again, it seems like Dak might have season-ending surgery here, which Cooper Rush, as I said before, not the best backup in the league, certainly not the worst, certainly capable. But they got the Eagles this week. They got they host the Texans on Monday Night Football. Then they're at the Commanders. Then you got that Giants game we talked about. Then they host the Bengals, at the Panthers, host the Bucks, at Philly, host the Commanders to end the season. Now, this is another one of those divisions where the hatred is just so deep, and it's so like, it's just decade after decade after decade of just gnashing your teeth and just colliding with all these teams. So it's like, could I see the Cowboys down Dak still stealing one from Philly, who I talked about earlier in the week, that I like them as a team. I think they're playing really good ball, but they haven't been super tested in terms of their schedule. So, like, could the Cowboys steal one? Could they steal one against a young, inexperienced Commanders team that also, not that they haven't been tested, but they haven't gotten it done in their big test, and all their wins have been against teams that are markedly worse than they are. Plus, you got that Giants game in Dallas. So there's some winnable games here. They're already at 3 wins, so one more is going to take them out. The Giants game, for sure, you're circling. It's really going to come down to can they rally behind Cooper Rush? Can they get something going? And that Giants game and that Panthers game, it's really going to, if they lose to the Panthers, then they got a real shot. If they beat the Panthers, then there's no shot at all. So I just can't see the Cowboys losing the rest of their schedule. I really can't. So I think they're at the least going to be a 4-win team. I'm going to take the Cowboys out of the mix here. So that leaves us with Panthers, Browns, Raiders, Patriots, Saints. I'm going to go back to the Browns because my gut was that they were going to get a couple wins in here. And I still stand by it. You got the Saints. You got the Dolphins. I think they can take one from the Steelers. I'm taking the Browns out of the mix. So I think we're down to Panthers, Raiders, Patriots, and Saints. When do these teams play each other? I guess I didn't have the Dolphins pulled up here, did I? Did we go through the Dolphins schedule? Now let's go through the Dolphins schedule real quick and just take a look. They got the Rams, Raiders, Patriots, Packers, Jets, Texans, 49ers, Browns, and Jets. So I think they're going to get one of those Jets games. They're going to get at least one of the Raiders, Patriots, Browns. Probably, I would bet they're going to get at least 2 of them, if not all 3. So I'm taking the Dolphins out. That was quick. So Panthers, Raiders, Patriots, and Saints. Head-to-head, we got the Panthers do not play any of those teams. The Raiders play the Saints in the penultimate week of the season. So that, like I said before, is going to be a critical matchup in this race. The Patriots do not play any of those teams. And the Saints got the Browns and the Raiders. So the Saints got the most control here. And I think with the Saints, it's going to come down to, does this just snowball completely? Because I could see them losing the rest of their games. But the Raiders, I think, are in a position where they low-key, not the players, not the coaching staff, but the organization, organizationally at the top, low-key probably, they don't want to lose all these games, but like there's an underlying understanding of like, well, we do kind of suck and we need a lot of pieces. Like being the worst team in football wouldn't be the worst thing in the world this year. But, if they beat the Dolphins this weekend, then you're taking that off the table pretty much. But that Raiders-Saints game to me is vitally important in this race. So one of those teams is going to be in real good position. Because I do think, like I said, I think the Browns are going to beat the Saints in a couple weeks. And the Panthers, like I said, I think they're going to lose to the Giants. You got the Chiefs, Bucks, Eagles, Cowboys, Cardinals, Bucks, Falcons. I think the Panthers are in the driver's seat. I think we all kind of felt like they were the worst team in football coming into the season. They've played like the worst team in football. Yes, they beat the Saints last week, but the Saints' vibes are catastrophically low. Chris Olave out with the concussion. Everything is going wrong for the Saints. They're on the longest losing streak in the league of anybody this season. If they lose to the Giants, which I think that the matchup of that defensive front against Carolina's offensive line. They lose this weekend. Your next winnable game is the Cowboys on December 15th. Maybe you eke out 3 wins, but like, I just, the Panthers to me, they gotta, the top odds gotta be on the Panthers. Then I like the Raiders and the Saints. Again, it's gonna come down to that December 29th game between the two of them. And the Patriots, they've had some moments of friskiness, but they got the toughest schedule here. I don't know. I think these are your 4 teams, though. These are the 4 worst teams in the league. These 4 teams might be tied at 3 wins apiece by the end of the season, or we might see 3 of them at 2 wins, 1 of them at 3 wins, 2 at 2 wins, 2 at 3 wins. But I think this is your top 4. This is definitely your top 4. If I had to again, as Woody Page would always say, you got to look at the schedule. Looking at the schedules, Panthers, Raiders, Patriots, Saints. Panthers are the worst team in football. The organization is a complete mess. They've bungled everything with this young quarterback. Their protection's terrible. They've traded away 2 of their top, 4 receivers. Just awful. Saints, worst vibes in the league by far. They got the best quarterback out of the bunch. I guess with no disrespect to Drake May, but he's rookie, so like, what's he gonna be on a bad team right now? What can you expect from him? But again, I talked about the 2 sides of the Drake May coin, where he's gonna play hero ball and he's gonna make a crazy ass play that helps you, and then he's gonna play hero ball and he's gonna make a terrible play that's gonna shoot you in the foot. So maybe that, like, I hate to compare him because Drake May seems like a nice guy, but the Favrean tendency to do that, it might win you a couple games in here and then lose you a bunch of games. But Derek Carr, the most experienced, I feel like if you need to just win 1 game, as much as we clown Derek Carr, you'll probably take him over any of these other quarterbacks right now on like not a good team. But I don't know. I think these are your 4 teams. I can't rank them. I wouldn't be shocked at any one of these teams picking first overall, because I think there's a good chance it's going to come down to tiebreakers too, and I have no idea what that's going to look like. But Panthers, Raiders, Patriots, Saints, worst teams in football. The only teams that I think are really, by the end of the season, going to be in contention for that top spot, top pick, not top spot, bottom spot, top pick. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you're a team of one of these 4 teams, or even some of the other bad teams that we talked about, condolences. There's always next year, and it is what it is. You look forward to the draft. Even if it's a down year in the draft, look forward to it. There's always some gems, even if it's a down year. Always a diamond in the rough ready to be taken out, or a stud at the top sitting there just waiting for you, especially if there's quarterback needy teams and they want to take a couple of these quarterbacks at the top. Maybe you got the 3rd pick, maybe you got the 4th pick, 5th pick, 6th pick, and you get a guy that's talented enough to be the top pick, but the quarterbacks push him down. We'll see. So there's always something to root for. There's always something to be excited about in football. So even if you're a fan of a dumpster fire team, thank you for tuning in. As always, take it easy, football heads.
Football heads!